Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And I think you're spot on. There's no doubt in my mind that if people understood how many zombie companies were publicly traded, there'd be a revolution tomorrow because
Yep.
they don't understand what they're a lot like Bitcoin is heading this direction too. People are going to own and benefit from Bitcoin without even knowing that they own and benefit from Bitcoin because the companies
Yep.
that are indexed are going to have it on their balance sheet. So everybody,
Yes.
that's where that, everybody benefits idea comes from. And I concur. But yeah, the businesses who pool a micro strategy and fully embrace the power of this engineered money are going to benefit the most. And the amazing thing is that some of them they won't need investors because they will
Yes.
just have the purchasing power. That one of the big kickbacks is, well, who would invest? Who would, Jack Mallers the other day was talking about how Bitcoin, he considers Bitcoin a different business line. And over the last 10 years, we've had 60% CAGR. So what's the opportunity cost? What am I going to spend that Bitcoin on that's going to produce more than 60%? Forget it. I'm not going
Yep.
to build the business. I'm just going to hold the Bitcoin. But like I said, the longer you hold that Bitcoin, the easier it is to open up a new store. The easier it is to hire more employees. So it's a push shove thing. But my position is this, and I believe I kind of Twitter stalk you because I just love your content. I love
Appreciate it.
your line of thinking. It's fantastic. It really is. Keep up the great work. It gets me thinking, and I love that. And I think one area where we kind of will butt heads a little bit here, so it'll be fun to get into this because I want to get
Of
your
course.
opinion,
Love it.
is money and currency are both their own tools, right? And you can use these tools together to be more efficient. So I think that the dollar is going to be around for longer than people are anticipating. And what that does is it creates an opportunity where when Tahini's is ready to open its new store, it shouldn't sell the Bitcoin. It should just borrow currency against its money and then invest the currency because the new restaurant isn't going to produce what Bitcoin's going to produce. And as long as the CAGR of Bitcoin is higher than the rate of which you're borrowing against it, that is actually my definition of yield. So a lot of people think, oh, to get yield on Bitcoin, I need to lend it to other people and introduce counterparty risk because it's the introduction of counterparty risk that produces the yield. Wrong. The way you get yield on Bitcoin is you borrow against your own Bitcoin and you're getting paid yield in terms of purchasing power because the burden of your debt is shrinking. And Michael Saylor is putting
Yes.
on a masterclass on how this works. It's unbelievable that other companies are just, it's the best performing stock. I believe since 2020, it's the best performing stock in the world. It's even more so than Nvidia. So this works. He is proving that it works as long as you have the right mindset, as long as you have that mindset of where we're going in the long run so that you don't get weak hands and get afraid. And I mean, imagine if he got afraid after FTX collapsed, right? He could have very easily gotten afraid and started to liquidate, but you have to
Yep.
understand what you're doing. But when you understand that Bitcoin is money and that money is not currency, and that currency, like you said, is going to continue. As a matter of fact, just before we hopped on, I got a notification of your tweet, and it was like, Bitcoin's going to 1 million because the dollar is going down. Bitcoin's going to 100 million because people are going to realize that they don't want to hold their other assets, right? So you're trying to show people that, the dilution of the dollar is going to bring us to 1 million. But once we get to 1 million, people are going to start to understand what Bitcoin really is. And they're going to start to solve everything else and get it into Bitcoin. And that's what's going to bring us to these huge numbers. But through that transfer of wealth, through that process, really we are empowered to borrow against our Bitcoin versus selling it. Now, I think after this transition takes place, you're right. Now we start spending it. But as we go through that transition, it would behoove us to understand how we can borrow currency against money and earn yield in terms of purchasing power with that methodology. What are your thoughts on that strategy?
So I agree with you. I think in an idealistic world, for banks, that will probably happen, but I don't know. Why would banks want to? Okay, so the way that I think of it is why would banks want to lend you money and give you all of your profits from holding your Bitcoin when they could do it themselves, or they could give that money to their buddies and they could share that Bitcoin yield with their friend? Why would they not Bitcoin yield, but Bitcoin growth. Why would they give you that money at a low interest rate? Unless interest rates go up. I don't think it makes sense for banks.
Yeah, well, a lot of what the banks do don't make sense right now.
Yeah,
But that's
because they can
that's
print
why
money, of course.
right. So that's why decentralized finance is so important. And I think a lot of what happened in the ecosystem with fruit farming and all this stuff, these are all scams. These are absolute scams.
What
Nobody
do you mean?
should remember when we went through the DeFi boom in like
Oh,
2018,
right, right,
twenty
right, right.
nineteen? It was like, oh, I'm farming yams and watermelon and like all it's like you guys are just
Digitally.
this is a joke. But you know what came from that? Aave, Maker, all these
Yeah.
protocols that are going to be around for a long time to come because there's a financial concentration. So yeah, you're not going to be able to go to a big bank. And actually, I thought it was very interesting during the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Cantor Fitzgerald announced they are getting into Bitcoin lending.
Yes.
So, and the reason that they're doing that, and the reason that the banks will be interested in this, in my opinion, is because it's riskless lending, right? So
Right.
if you underwrite a mortgage, and someone defaults on that mortgage, the cost of figuring out how to liquidate that property, how to foreclose on that property. First of all, it can take up to 18 to 24 months to complete that process. And most of the cost of that process is going to wipe out just as much as the default. So sometimes it
Yeah.
could be like a double default because they defaulted on 250K. Well, it takes 250K over the next 2 years to get the money back. So you by the end of it, you get the 250K you're owed by liquidating the property. Then you have to turn around and write a check to the lawyers for 250K. So nothing
Yeah.
comes from it. It's high risk lending, even though it's secured lending against real estate. And it's still like that, which is why the banks don't keep the mortgages on their balance sheet. They package them together and sell them to the suckers because they know the reality of it. But with
Yeah.
Bitcoin lending, when you post Bitcoin as collateral, and if you default on that loan, first of all, it's over collateralized, right? So you're borrowing less currency against the value of the money. And then if it gets to the point where that loan to value ratio isn't right and you get liquidated, that's the risk you take as the borrower. You can
Yeah.
lose your Bitcoin. But if you do it, you know, if somebody has their savings and they have $100,000 in savings, they should not borrow 70,000 or $60,000 against their savings. That's just stupid. But if you have a large sum of Bitcoin because you've been in the market for a while and it's increased your purchasing power, and now you can borrow a very small amount of currency against the large money purchasing power that you have in order to go on a business venture or increase your cash flows, one of those ventures, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for the borrower, but even more important, it makes a lot of sense for the lender because everybody wants to borrow money, but only if the lender wants to lend the money are you actually going to get anything. So
Yeah.
when the lender has an over collateralized position and on top of it, a position that can be closed in 10 minutes with 10-minute block times, that's very low risk. That's very
Yeah.
low risk and very high reward. So I do think the banks are going to get into uh, loans against Bitcoin. Cantor is kind of leading the way, but I also think that decentralized finance is going to play its role for people who don't want that. They'd rather have code as the middleman versus a traditional uh, banker or broker as
Bank.
the middleman. But I do think you are right. It's there's a understanding, right? These guys are coming from the fiat maximalist mindset versus the Bitcoin mindset. And the God's honest truth is they flip the system upside down because they are the biggest borrowers, right? When you and I
Yeah.
deposit our money at the bank, we are lending them our money. That's why they pay us
Yes.
interest. So the biggest
Exactly.
borrowers in the world are governments and banks. They're the two biggest borrowers. So of course the system has been manipulated to benefit the borrowers and to hurt the lenders because real interest rates are negative. They're paying us
Yep.
a yield that's less than the inflation rate. We are losing in real terms. They are winning in real terms. So we need to do the
Right.
same thing, but with Bitcoin being borrowed against versus our credit score or our real estate property, and we can experience those same benefits, but in a sound economic system versus a manipulated one.